Another aspect of life after Brexit when they respond to a petition calling for an end to the export of live animals for slaughter. It's been an emotive issue for years, with campaigners blockading ports to stop what they see as a cruel trade, which can mean animals travelling long distances to abattoirs in Europe. The broadcaster, Selina Scott, says that once free of EU rules, the UK should ban it altogether. Here's her soapbox.
I have a farm in this beautiful corner of North Yorkshire. My life these days is tied to the seasons and the farming calendar. Soon it'll be spring, and in these fields all around here there'll be newborn lambs frolicking in the fresh air with their mothers. The life of a lamb, unfortunately, is a short one. Once they're a year old and after fattening, they're taken to the local market and sold for slaughter, or worse. It was the monks of great Cistercian abbeys like Revo here who brought huge flocks of sheep to the area and made immense amounts of money out of the sale of wool, riches that Henry VIII seized along with their land. 600 years later, and the sale of one lamb at auction can fetch between 80 and 100 pounds, not nearly enough to pay for the full-time shepherding skills needed to care for sheep, skills that are now a dying art. Sheep, plain and simple these days, have become industrialised. They've become mere commodities, no longer treated as sentient beings, animals that can feel pain. And we, as a nation of animal lovers, and to our everlasting shame, have turned a blind eye to the cruelty inflicted on our sheep and lambs once they're sold at auction. The condoning of the trade in live lambs across the European Union is absolutely abhorrent. In the UK, thousands of lambs and sheep are herded into overcrowded trucks from counties like Cumbria and Yorkshire and driven hundreds of miles without food or fresh water to be shipped from Ramsgate in Kent to revolting abattoirs somewhere in southern or eastern Europe. Instead of a humane killing in a local abattoir, sold on as a carcass, these poor creatures have to suffocate in transit, suffer with broken bones and damaged bodies until they reach their destination, where they meet an unspeakable death. For years, the EU has been the prime enabler of this cruelty, and successive UK governments have supinely acquiesced. Well, we're at a turning point, and now there is no excuse. We are leaving the EU, and we no longer have to follow EU rules on live transportation of animals across a continent. We must finish off this trade once and for all, and with immediate effect.
And Selina Scott joins us now. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Selina, what do you say to those within the farming industry itself who say that leaving the EU will put their industry at risk?
Well, first of all, Jo, a lot of farmers, I'm not talking about dealers, but a lot of farmers do not like this business, do not want this business of their animals going off like this. They send them to market and they sell them. There's nothing that they can do about it after that. The other point that should be made is this is still a very marginal trade. 1 in 300 sheep is sent to Europe and to far-flung places further on from Europe. But even so, it's a horrific trade. It's a filthy business. I talked about sheep there. Calves are being sent, unweaned calves from Northern Ireland, spent 6 days in trucks going all the way to Spain. I mean, how can anyone, I mean, if as a nation, do we care about the animals that we put into these situations? Do we care that they suffer? And that's basically the question. Farmers, I think, are on the whole behind it, but, you know, it's down now to the politicians to do something about it.
Right, but, I mean, do you accept that actually there are some journeys that are going to France and Belgium, abattoirs, for example, might be shorter than going to other parts of the UK?
No, the fact is, we're talking about welfare here. If you send any animal over a long distance, over water, you don't know where they're going to end up. Yes, a farmer can send his animals, her animals, to an abattoir in France if they live in, say, Wiltshire or wherever. It can then be re-exported. It can be re-exported to, for example, Turkey. The other day, a Brazilian court stopped the live transportation of animals from Brazil to abattoirs in Turkey because of the grotesque conditions that Turkish abattoirs put their animals through.
All right.
This is happening. It's been happening for 40 years.
What's the government doing about it? Because they've said once the UK has left the EU, there will be the possibility to consider further measures in this area, which sounds rather opaque.
Well, Michael Gove has obviously taken the running on this and realised that actually once Brexit happens, we'll have the opportunity to create our own separate new public body that will look at environmental standards and animal welfare.
And should live exports be banned?
I think, Selina's made an incredibly powerful and compelling case here. The government's already taken through legislation to bring in CCTV in abattoirs in this country, but then you've got that balance that she's just mentioned about actually, obviously, if those standards won't be there abroad. So we'll have higher standards in the UK, and it may be right that we want to look at this going forwards.
Right.
And actually say this is something that could be an enormous benefit of leaving the European Union.
So you're warm to the idea?
Absolutely.
Right, and you, Lisa?
Very warm to the idea, but it's not quite true to say that there's nothing that we can do at the moment, because although it's right to say that the single market potentially prevents us from banning live exports of animals, it doesn't prevent us from putting stricter standards in place to the current system that we've got at the moment. And I'd quite like to see us do something now rather than wrangle about what we do in the future, with a view to trying to end this practice.
Do you agree with that, Selina, that actually more could be done now without leaving the EU?
I think it should be stopped right now. What is stopping us from saying, right, in an agricultural bill, now, stop it, finish it? It's been going on for 40 years. I mean, this is a country that thinks of itself as a nation of animal lovers. People like me, lots and lots of people feel marginalised by this behaviour. We should stop it right now.
Right, so if it could be done now without, or even before leaving the EU, how much pressure can you put on the government, the current government, to take you up on what you're proposing?
Well, there is a petition. If anyone is listening to this now and wants to sign this petition, it's petition 200-205. Go to the Parliamentary Petitions website, put your name to it, because it's the power of the people that's going to change this finally. If it's left, I have to say, it's left to the politicians. We'll argue about the rights and wrongs, whether farmers want it, whether dealers want it. Well, we'll allow unscrupulous people to take advantage of this transition period we're supposed to be going through after Brexit. And that's not good enough.
Except the Scottish Government is not very keen on what you're proposing, and they, of course, want to also stay in the EU. They say it would damage the livestock industry there, so you will not have their support.
I don't know how Fergus Ewing, who is a spokesman, of course, for the Scottish Parliament, can live with himself when he sees unweaned unweaned calves taken off their mothers and put into trucks and spending 6 days travelling. How can a man like Fergus Ewing get up in the morning and say, oh, he's doing his best?
Because he will say, and I'm not a spokesman for the Scottish Government here, but he will say it will damage the livestock industry in Scotland.
Yeah, well, there's certain regulations that's got to be brought in, of course. The English system has subsidies which are given to farmers for acreage. They don't have to raise animals to get the subsidy. In Scotland, it's different. It's on per head of sheep, per head of cattle. And eventually this has all got to be brought into line. It's up to the politicians to work out how Scotland comes into line with England and how England comes into line with Scotland. The most important thing is welfare of animals.
Selina Scott, thank you. Now, you may be aware of the campaign to give 16-year-olds